I want to talk about this. I'm going to go through it somewhat quickly, but it's a good thing that we could ask some. I don't think I put questions in Pox about this, so maybe I did. I'll look at that. Questions for Starbucks. But there's been this sequence, and I just want to put this in. I will go through it somewhat quickly. So we've gone through a sequence of things like just Murray's law at the branching of a pipe, right? I mean, or branching of tubes. You know, really basic kind of optimality structures at very, very small scales, out to the single source to many sinks kind of thing, or you can think of this in various ways. Or many sources going to one sink, which that's a this is a hard thing to do for a lot of things, right? If you just have one source and you're in 3 dimensions, it's hard work, right? That's hard work, right? So when we get to certainly the scales of a continent, we're going to have to break it down. And indeed, when you think about river networks, that's of course what happens, right? It's actually a whole bunch of basins that drain off continents, right? There's not just one big outlet, unless you're Australia and you just don't have any. Because you're very old, flat, and you've given up. It's okay. Let's see. Okay, good. Yep. Look, let me just add one more thing. This braiding versus non-braiding thing, really profound thing. There was a paper, I did reference it in the slides, but it's the Banavar team again. They did another thing in 1999, which is it is a very nice paper, and they've proven it sort of a different way that if you have some impedance story, again, there was that kind of current to the power of gamma, depending on that exponent, you would go from having loops, the way they thought about it, having loops in the flow versus non-loops, which is that distinction between braiding and non-braiding. So that's really very cool. Of course, famously electrical circuits, right? They have braiding in them, and are essentially, and we'll see this later on. Current running through an electrical circuit matches up with random walks, which is kind of an awesome thing. So cool. Which we'll use to find communities, which is really strange, right? Yeah. That would be really fun, actually. Okay, so, okay, all right. So, I mean, this is just so much fun to talk about. So we're going to have lots of things now, lots of sources and lots of sinks. And we'll think about it 2 dimensions. You could have higher dimensions, but this is a big deal for us, especially as sort of humans, like running around trying to, get out little packages from Amazon with nice little things in them, and or whatever it is, and or our little packets of information, right, that come through, your little Instagram post that makes you happy, right, little pellets of, because that's what we are now, with little information receiving objects. We've had to build really interesting things. Okay. Oh, Amazon's trying to do this now, right? Amazon's starting their own delivery service. Is that true? Yeah, like to compete with UPS and FedEx, whose stocks sort of went. All right, so, okay. Right. So, good. I have to stop myself from talking about other things. Okay, so we're going to have uneven population densities. And we understand why that is, and I think there's still work, we were talking about this the other day, to like, maybe there's something quite beautiful way we could figure out the people are distributed in some way optimally based, and maybe it's just at different points in time, based on the geography, right, of the landscape. Because rivers will matter, mountain structures will matter, and so on. So people, they only live in certain parts of the world, and they really tend to clump together. Of course, there's been more of a movement to cities, famously. I don't know, yeah. But generally, the way we'll think about it is you think about these problems in the human world is that we have people distributed in some way, and that's just fixed, right? And so against that background, how will you now put down hospitals and Starbucks and so on, right? Oh, what else do we have? What are the things we have? CrossFit boxes. We've had to add them as we build our little religion. Totally a religion, actually. Yeah, really, really good. Yeah, because they're a test for religion. Like, would you let people in your group like look after your kids? Would you borrow money from them? Would you lend them like all these little sort of? And he was like, check, 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 check. But Danforth says no, it's not. It's not. Okay. So anyway, he's fine. He's above it all. Okay. Let's see. So, okay, so we understand this, right? So if we had people just distributed uniformly, then we distribute it out. We'd have to put our Starbucks in uniformly. And so that's true in places like the suburbs, right? Where it's translationally invariant. And I remember driving through, I think, places like Orange County, and I think it was somewhere in Cincinnati. Like, the same stuff comes back every 3 or 4 or 5 miles, like another mall, and the same things are in it. And it's just like, did I go in a loop? And no, it's just, you know, and there's no structural whatever. You know you're kind of in trouble when people start giving you directions. They say, go to the first McDonald's and then turn. Like, it's not the beautiful tree or anything. It's now like referenced by fast food structures and large boxes. You're like, and I'm always like, no, don't tell me those things. But of course now we have little magic rectangles that tell you where to go, which we obey. Okay, so we understand that, and right, and in fact, you know, that makes it easy. Just put another mole there. So that's a hexagonal lattice because it's awesome. 2 dimensions. We can talk. We've talked about it in parks. We had a lot of fun with that in parks. But it is a very special lattice. It's the only regular lattice that feels like you can't feel the lattice, right? So if you had a big triangular hexagonal lattice and you squeeze it, it feels like it's just one big uniform shape. But if it's, you know, square, then you can find the structure matters. So you should do all your simulations on a hexagonal lattice. It also justifies Settlers of Catan and checkers, Chinese checkers. Okay, so all right, so population density is absolutely incredibly uneven. I mean, here's an example. This is from Gassner and Newman, and yeah, people are really banked up on the coast, of course, and then away from the Rockies. So I'm just going to tell you, this is just revisiting this quickly. I just want to talk about it quickly. There aren't a bazillion slides. I might skip over the Stefan stuff. Okay, most fair, right? So you want, there are a range of things, and the work that we'll get to eventually, as you'll recall, is somewhat recent. It's only the last 10 years that people have sort of added to this, but this is a long body. People have been thinking about this for a long time. I'm sure it goes back 100 years, but you have geographers and mathematicians and computer scientists, like all solving different kinds of problems, but basically the same thing. So this is the idea of this is hospitals. So you're trying to, in this case, you might want to have the average distance that anyone has to the nearest place is as short as possible. Okay, so we've got some uneven region. This is the basic thing, and again, this is just to refamiliarize you with this. There's some density underneath it, some population. We've got n things we want to put down. And then this first game would be minimizing the average distance. So you can see you could do this with like a simulated annealing or some sort of optimization thing. You've got this fixed structure, you throw it down. So this is the results. Again, and these are just great papers to have if this is something that comes across into your vision, something you have to think about at some point. This is putting 5,000 facilities down, and against a backdrop of population which was from the 2000 census, right? So of course you can't see these things properly. You know, when there's enough density, it's like, you know, it's really stacked up. It's not shown here. But the cells again. So each one of these little blue dots is a facility. There's a population that's not shown, but in the background there's going to be some population of people here. And so what's really happening is this equalization of things, right? So that there are less people here, so you know they're going to have to travel further, which is a bit of a problem. But they don't count quite as much, right? Because there are just less of them. So there's going to be this balance of things, and then you also have things about you don't want to overwhelm places, so that's a problem as well. I don't know if that's in this one. You have to think about, what's the maximum number. It's not really in this one. You just make a bigger hospital because it's really just the distance. All right. So that's an optimization thing. And if you look then at the local density of people, again, this is prescribed and fixed in this case. Of course, it changes over time, and that's an interesting thing. And then the density of these facilities, and then plot a regression, you get rho to the 2/3. So it's a bit of a funny, you have to think about this a little bit. It's density of facilities as a function of density of people, and it scales as a 2/3 power. So fits pretty good. Of course, we are, and I'm going to use this notation, facility and population. They've got rows and big Ds if you go to the thing. Good, looks good. And so it's a 2/3 power, right? That's what you think, that's what you guess, because you want it to be explainable and you want to go for the simplest thing first. So little d, in this case, right? D equals 2. So 2 over 2 plus 1. So that would be a bit of a game we'd like to get to. And indeed, that's the story, right? There's a very different story to branching networks that we had, right? One source, one sink, and then many of the other kind. Now they're distributed throughout a region. So it's another kind of optimal thing. The network structure will go on top because then you want to think about how do you get between these. So, for example, we could have our sinks or our facilities could be airports, right? So where do we put airports so that people can get to them reasonably well? But how do we also then allocate them so they can connect fairly well between each other? Hopefully this is not too bad of me to say this again. So I just want to point to this one. I'm going to skip through it, but people know about this paper, I guess. But again, this is a science paper. I mean, it certainly got a nice big billing at the time. I don't know if Stefan is still around, but he's an interesting character. I know I talked about him in Pox. Sort of a story that he seems to have been. He was a sociologist who was kind of like looked down upon, I think, by his fellow sociologists. He had some struggles. He was interested in the internet, and they said, you should not. It's not the web. And he said, no. He was told not to work on that. This is in the 90s. It's really true, actually. I mean, he's not the only person. There are a number of people like that who were in sociology or those sorts of departments, like especially young people coming up saying, oh, this is really interesting. We should study what's going on the web. And people say, no. Number of stories like that. Okay. All right, so it's a nice argument. We're not going to go through it, but it has some issues, but he was able to derive this sort of thinking about one location. But there's a better one, and it's really Gusain Zaid, I think, is the first place, but we'll see this Newman paper does it well.